Well, hello again, everybody. I want to talk with you now about the final exam review so that you know what to expect and what to study. So, again, follow along with me by going to course documents and then looking for that final exam review sheet. And so, things to study. Know the following periods and genres in American literature and their basic common themes, characteristics, and ideas. So, early 20th century prose, the Harlem Renaissance, and literature since 1945, including, of course, modernism and postmodernism. And so you want to look back at any documents since the midterm. Remember, the final exam is not cumulative. So it begins where the midterm left off. It goes from the midterm to now. So look at any document since the midterm, see the weekly checklist, or look at your syllabus to be reminded of what those documents were. Pull them up, go back and look at my videos if that helps you. Carefully study the discussion boards that we've held since the midterm. Go back and reread all of the questions because that's where some of the material will be drawn from as well. So, part one of the midterm will be divided into three sections, all of which together count for 50% or 100 points of your final exam grade. And note that the entire final exam grade counts for 20% of your final grade in this class. So the first section of part one will consist of multiple choice questions, just like the midterm. And here's an example of what one of those questions might look like. The Harlem Renaissance refers to a blossoming circa 1918 to 1937 of African American culture, particularly in the creative arts. B, the most influential movement in African American literary history. C, a movement that extended beyond literature, embracing musical, theatrical, and visual arts. D, a movement that sought to reconceptualize, quote unquote, the Negro apart from the white stereotypes that had influenced black people's relationship to their heritage and to each other. Or E, all of the above. So if you had been paying attention to my video musings when we studied the Harlem Renaissance, you know that the correct answer is E, all of the above. And a little birdie just keeps fluttering around me and twittering and saying that question might be on the final exam. And those of you who have really been go-getters and you're watching the video musing right now, you'll get that answer correct. Whereas the other folks who aren't watching the video won't get it correct, probably. The second section of part one will consist of fill-in-the-blank questions, and here's an example of what one of those questions might look like. The 20th century saw the emergence of a genre called blank, which responded to the world's increasing complexity by asserting the idea that the individual had the potential to achieve a broader perspective than that offered by any one society or its history. And of course, if you remember, the answer there is modernism. So think of the idea that in the earlier part of the 20th century, modernism came along. The world was becoming more complicated because even though we were having all these new forms of communication like radio and television, and other forms of transportation like being able to fly on an airplane and having automobiles and things like that, those changes also complicated our lives. And it allowed us to learn about other parts of the world and to travel more easily and more quickly to other parts of the world. So the individual now had the potential to achieve more of a broader sense of the world, more than what would be offered by that one person's society and its history. So that's modernism. And that little birdie says, that question's probably going to be on the final. The third section of part one features actual quotes or passages from texts that we've read since the midterm. So it will be your job to identify the title of a text and the author. And again, I'm not going to mix those up and put the wrong author with a title. To me, that's just sort of, dirty pool, and I'm not going to do that. But I will provide a listing of text and authors for you. However, not all of the names of the authors and titles that are listed will actually be used. So there'll be more titles and authors listed there than you'll actually have room to use, and it will be your job to figure out, okay, this quote comes from this text by this author. So here's an example of what one of those quotes might look like. "What's the matter with you all of a sudden?" he asked, frowning as he screwed the top on the flask and put it quickly back inside the Bible. "You just a while ago said you didn't believe in nothing. I thought you was some girl." Well, if you remember, the answer is Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People. And that little birdie is saying, yeah, that might just be on the final exam, part 1. So that's part 1. Part 2 of the final will consist of a short essay question, again, just like the midterm, which will count for the remaining 50% or the remaining 100 points of your final exam grade. And this question will span the periods, the themes, the genres of American Lit that we've looked at since the midterm. You'll be expected to write at least 4 paragraphs, so 4. And you do not need a works cited page. However, you should include quotes in your paper and cite them in MLA formatting. And you must quote at least 2 times. If you quote more than that, that's fine, but at least 2 times in your paper. So at the end of a quote, if it's prose, then in parentheses, you'll have the author's last name and the page number. No comma in between, period after the last parenthesis. If it's poetry, you'll have the author's last name and the line number. Remember that. So your essay should contain a formal heading on page 1, and I give you an example there. So your name, my name, the course name, and the date in MLA formatting. So I'm not going to say May 2nd, 2020, or 5-/2-2021. Rather, I'm going to say 2 May 2021, right? And I give you that example. In the upper right-hand corner of page 2 and any other successive pages, you would have your last name and the page number. So here's an example of an incorporated quote with a correct in-text citation in MLA formatting, because that's going to be important to avoid point deductions. The author masterfully presents a seemingly naive young man who poses as a Bible salesman, quote, "Well, lady, I'll tell you the truth. Not many people want to buy a Bible nowadays, and besides, I know I'm real simple. I don't know how to say a thing but to say it. I'm just a country boy," unquote. And then in parentheses, O'Connor, 362, end parentheses, period. So now the first thing I want to point out to you is, what would have happened if that colon after the words Bible salesman had been turned into a period? Your quote would be dropped, because your quote would then appear all by itself as a sentence. And the golden rule is, anytime you have a quote that appears by itself as a sentence in your paper with no writing of your own in that same sentence, you've dropped that quote and you get points deducted. So you can use that colon method because your sentence just before that quote is a complete one. It is an independent clause with a subject and a verb and all kinds of other good things, and it makes complete sense within itself. So you can use the colon. If you were writing before that quote had not been an independent clause, a complete sentence, if it had only been part of a sentence, you would need a comma. But if that colon turns into a period, you've dropped that quote. And notice that a Bible, those words a Bible, is bracketed. They're bracketed. Think why that might be. Well, that's because the writer of this has changed the wording there from the original quote. So probably the original quote might have said, "Well, lady, I'll tell you the truth, not many people want to buy one nowadays." And so the writer wants his or her reader to understand what that one refers to, and it is a Bible. So that word was changed from one to a Bible, and now it's put in brackets to indicate that change. Also note there is no period after "I'm just a country boy." There's no period there. That's not the end of your sentence. No. Your sentence now ends after your in-text citation. It does not end after the quote. So bear that in mind. And again, remember, in poetry, if you choose to write about a poem for the final exam, you'll place the line number in the in-text citation and not the page number. So be sure not to use first or second person in your writing. This is college writing. This is formal academic writing. You are not a high school student anymore. We are not in Kansas anymore, Toto. So we do not use the words I or me or you or your unless they are part of a quote that you're using. Your writing needs to be appropriate for college level work. So you're going to use one or ones instead. One may argue that. One may see that, right? Or you're going to restructure your sentence to avoid the need for me or I or you or your to start with. So here are those short essay questions. You'll choose one of them and respond to it in your short essay for part 2 of the final. So here's the first one. Explain why modern American literature should be studied. What universal themes does it uphold? What particular rhetorical techniques and strategies does it demonstrate? How does it help us to become better, wiser human beings? Use specific examples of at least 2 texts that we have studied to illustrate your points. So you can choose any 2, but one of them should definitely be a text we've looked at since the midterm. And then here's the second option. Choose and comment on 2 texts that we have studied this semester. What are the main messages and themes present in those texts? How do these writings compare with one another? What are their similarities? What are their differences? So again, you can comment on genre. So are they both examples of realism, for example, or is one maybe indicative of naturalism while one is a realist text? You can comment on similar rhetorical techniques. So are you seeing examples of symbolism, imagery, imagism, alliteration, rhyme in both or one of them? You can comment on plot, character, setting, any element at all of those 2 texts, how they're similar, how they're different, right? And so you'll take part 1 of the final by going to the quizzes tab toward the top of our Brightspace course page, and then looking for final exam part 1. The questions, just like with a midterm in part 1, will all be multiple choice. They will be timed. And note that the final exam, both parts 1 and 2, will open at 8 o'clock a.m. on Monday the 3rd. So on Monday the 3rd of May at 8 o'clock, that's when they are open to you. Please take part 1 before 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, May the 4th. It will close at 11:59 on Tuesday the 4th, and if you haven't taken it by then, it will be too late and you will receive a 0. You may upload your short essay for part 2 into the assignments tab. So look for assignments up toward the top of our Brightspace course page, and then look for final exam part 2. And again, upload your draft there no later than 11:59 p.m. on the day of our final, Tuesday the 4th of May. And you can certainly take your time to write part 2. Now, part 1, you should not use your textbook. You should not use any aids whatsoever. Part 2, you should use your textbook and course documents if you like. So post any questions that you might have about the final exam in the final exam questions topic section under the final exam discussion board, or simply email me. And so here are some policies, just end of the semester and final exam policies that should be helpful to you. Final grades for all your classes can be found by going to My Pellissippi and looking under final grades. And while we instructors are responsible for submitting final grades into the system, obviously, we're not responsible for allowing you to actually see them in My Pellissippi. We don't do that. Rather, the higher powers of the IT world somewhere manage all of that. And so generally, though, grades become visible to you a day or 2 days after we have posted them into the system. But if you were to email any of us and ask us when exactly your grades are going to appear, we cannot answer that question because, as I say, we do not actually manage that part of the process. So please do not email me asking for your grade on the final exam or for the class, because at this point we are inundated with grading final papers, final exams, with calculating all of the grades, with posting them for over 100 people, and we just simply do not have enough time to respond to individual inquiries because we have hard, firm deadlines. Note that you can see your current grades for all the assignments in this class so far by going to grades on our Brightspace course page. Grades are calculated by the Brightspace system automatically. However, I also keep a separate hard copy of grades that I manually enter because I'm old and I don't trust this newfangled technology. So I actually check Brightspace's calculations against my own to make sure that they're consistent and they're correct. And finally, I just want to say that I have truly enjoyed having each one of you in my class this semester. I know that this semester has been challenging for all of us. We're suffering through a worldwide pandemic. Thank goodness there's some light now at the end of that tunnel. And I'll be so glad when we're back to normal and back in the classroom again. But I thank you for hanging in there with me. And I hope that I'll be able to meet those of you whom I haven't had the privilege of meeting live and in person in the fall semester. Pop into my office and say hello. Send me an email and keep in touch and let me know how you're doing. And if there's anything that I can do to be of help to you in the future, please do not hesitate to let me know. This has been one of my most favorite classes. So thank you so much. Good luck with your final exams and have a happy summer.